My husband won't even let me touch him after I cheated. A reflection on betrayal and consequences. Let me start by being straightforward. If I were in your shoes, I wouldn't want to be touched either. My name is Amy. I'm here to share a story that serves as a cautionary tale about infidelity and the chaos it creates. I am not a victim in this situation. The real victims are my husband, my children, and even my parents who have had to bear the weight of my choices. For that, I am truly sorry. A snapshot of my life. 19 months ago. I was caught in a betrayal that shattered my world and that of my loved ones. Before that, my life seemed picture perfect. I'm a 32-year-old woman married to my wonderful husband, Jim, who is 39. Together, we have two amazing boys aged 9 and 11. From the outside, it looked like we had everything we could ever want, but beneath the surface, I made a choice that would haunt me forever. To provide some context, my affair began over 2 years ago. I only got caught 19 months ago. It lasted nearly 5 months, during which I was physically involved with another man, Steve. A married neighbor. While I wish to be honest and forthright, I can tell you this. I was with Steve physically only 4 times. I know it sounds unbelievable, but that's the truth. You might wonder what led to this. Were there problems in my marriage? Did I not love Jim? The answer is a resounding no to all those questions. I was completely happy and fulfilled in my marriage. Jim was everything I ever dreamed of and more. I loved him and our boys more than anything in the world. The misplaced attraction to Steve stemmed from a deep-seated desire within me, almost like a primal instinct. One I thought I had long buried. The allure of a first love. My story has roots in my past, which I'll try to explain. In high school, I dated a few boys, but nothing serious came of those relationships. Then I met Charles, a friend's cousin, at a barbecue. When I was 18, Charles was magnetic. The moment I laid eyes on him, I felt drawn to him like a moth to a flame. We exchanged numbers and our connection quickly blossomed. Our first kiss was magical, and it didn't take long before I found myself losing my virginity to him. Despite the passion we shared, I realized soon enough that we had little in common. We were incompatible, and I broke it off with him. After 11 months, fast forward. A year later, I met Jim. While sparks didn't fly initially, over time, I developed a profound love for him, deeper than anything I had ever felt before. Jim checked all my boxes. He was the stable, kind and dependable partner I knew I wanted to marry. We wed a year later. And for 13 joyful years, our marriage flourished until my infidelity destroyed it. The spark of temptation, the catalyst for my affair with Steve, was his arrival in our neighborhood. Steve and his wife Marcia were the youngest couple around, and their energy was contagious. My husband and I invited them to a neighborhood picnic where Steve and I first locked eyes. It was eerily reminiscent of my first encounter with Charles. The chemistry was palpable. I felt that familiar spark reignite within me. A week later, Jim and I visited Steve at the car dealership where he worked. While my husband chatted with him about the SUV we were looking to buy, Steve and I exchanged furtive glances, each one a silent acknowledgement of our attraction. Then came the moment that changed everything. I returned to the dealership a few days later to have mud flaps installed. And that's when Steve asked me into his office for a private conversation. As we sat down, the tension was electric. It didn't take long for Steve to confess that he felt a connection with me and wanted to explore it further. Despite my better judgment telling me this was wrong, I found myself swept away by the thrill of it all. The following morning, I found myself in his arms for the first time, the danger of the situation only adding to the excitement, the illusion of control. I convinced myself that I could manage both my affair and my marriage. I thought I could have my cake and eat it too, enjoying this clandestine relationship while maintaining my family life, but deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before my actions caught up with me. The physical relationship lasted a total of 4 encounters over those 5 months, but there was no emotional connection involved. I loved Jim, and I had never loved Steve. However, the allure of the forbidden was intoxicating. I was a stay-at-home mom. And perhaps I craved the attention and validation I was receiving from this younger man. I believed I could compartmentalize my life, keeping my family safe while indulging in a secret adventure. The fallout. I wish I could say that I was smart enough to end things before they escalated, but fate had other plans. It was a Thursday morning when everything fell apart. Steve and I were in his bed when Marcia's mother unexpectedly walked in on us. What followed was chaotic and traumatic. She went into a frenzy, yelling obscenities, slapping and scratching Steve, and hitting me square on the jaw before I could gather my clothes and escape. When I got back to my house, I was a wreck. The reality of what I had done washed over me like a wave of guilt and despair. I knew my seemingly fairy tale marriage to Jim was forever altered after a couple of hours of silent contemplation. I called Jim, leaving an urgent message that I needed to speak with him, but he didn't respond. Panic set in when I heard knocking on the door and screams from Marcia and her mother demanding to know if I was home. I was terrified and overwhelmed with embarrassment. Thankfully, my boys were at school, but I was utterly lost in my guilt and shame. When the chaos finally subsided, I lay on the couch in tears, unsure of what the future held for me. A journey of redemption. Fast forward to today. I am still struggling to reconcile the damage I have done. My husband won't even let me touch him anymore. I don't blame him. Trust. Once broken is hard to rebuild. I live each day with the weight of my actions, trying to figure out how to move forward. I've started therapy to help me understand why I made such terrible choices, and to work on my issues, hoping one day I can regain my husband's trust. In sharing my story, I hope to shed light on the devastating effects of infidelity, not just on the betrayed partner, but also on the betrayer and the innocent children caught in the crossfire. If you find yourself in a similar situation, I urge you to reflect deeply before making choices that could ruin your life and the lives of those you love. Infidelity is not merely a mistake. It's a fracture in the foundation of trust that can take years, if not a lifetime, to mend. My hope is that by sharing my experience, I can help others think twice before walking down that perilous path. I looked outside and saw my husband, so I hurried to the bathroom to splash water on my face and check my appearance before going to greet him. But when he opened the door, he didn't come. Instead, I noticed him walking down the street toward Steve and Marcia's house. He stayed there for almost 3 hours before returning home. I wondered what he was doing with Marcia when he finally got home. I went to hug him, but he pushed me away. I started apologizing, but he told me he didn't accept my apology and wanted me to leave. I fell to the floor crying, begging him not to go, but he insisted. You notice how in these kinds of stories, the women often go down on their knees and start begging. It seems like a common tactic. He then called my mom, told her what happened, and asked her to come pick me up. When she arrived, she apologized to Steve and made me go back to her house for the night. I was crying and asked Jim what he would tell the kids, and he said he would handle it. I left feeling broken, hearted, and ashamed. I admire Jim for saying he would talk to the kids because they deserve to know the truth, even though they are young. He needs to explain things in an appropriate way. I called Jim later, surprised when he answered. He just said hello and stayed quiet. I told him it was me, that I was really sorry and that I would never do it again. I promised to spend my life making it up to him. Jim didn't say much and asked if I had anything else to say. I said no and asked how he felt. He replied, what I'm feeling, which made me cry. Then he said he wanted me to stay at my parents' house for a couple of weeks before coming home. I reluctantly agreed but asked when I could see him and the boys again. He said he didn't want to see me now, but would call me every evening at 9 o'clock. Our next call went the same way, with me apologizing and him being silent until I stopped talking. Then he told me he wanted a divorce hearing. That made me cry. And I begged him for another chance, but he refused. He knew he'd lose half his assets, but then he said he would give me everything he owned if I would just leave him and the boys alone. At that moment, he just wanted me out of his life. I broke down telling him he didn't mean that, but he insisted he did. After that call, I cried all night. I started thinking of ways to make him stay and came up with a plan to offer him a post-nuptial agreement that would be so good for him that he couldn't refuse. All I wanted was a second chance to prove my love, no matter the cost. The next week, while Jim was meeting with his divorce lawyer, I was also meeting with one, not to prepare for a divorce, but to create a post-nuptial agreement to show Jim before I got the divorce papers. I visited 4 different lawyers until I found one who specialized in post-nuptial agreements and was willing to make an agreement that heavily favored Jim. This agreement would let Jim keep almost all our marital assets if we stayed married and living together for at least 30 months. If I were unfaithful again and we divorced, I would lose everything and get no alimony or child support. It also required me to get a full-time job within 6 months and contribute to our household expenses, plus it allowed Jim to date other women during our marriage. I knew Jim would never cheat, but I wanted him to know I loved him enough to give him this option. Surprisingly, Jim accepted my offer, but he wanted one more condition. There would be no requirement for us to sleep together or have any intimacy for the rest of our marriage. I felt sad but agreed, hoping that in time I could win back his love and respect. Things didn't go as I had hoped. Now, 17 months into what I call our second marriage, our relationship feels more like two roommates raising our boys. While I'm grateful for a second chance, it doesn't feel like a real marriage. Jim hasn't shown me any affection at all, not even a kiss or a hug. He won't let me near him to express any affection. Although I sometimes sneak in a hug and a kiss before he can stop me, he also requires me to get monthly STD tests, which makes it clear he doesn't trust me. Since the affair, Jim won't go out with me, even to family events. He feels embarrassed by me. At our boys' games, we alternate who takes them. When it's my turn, Jim shows up, but doesn't sit with me instead. He stands with other dads and ignores me. The only times we go out together are for trips or vacations where we book separate rooms with 2 queen beds, one for the boys and one for us. I look forward to these trips because they bring us closer, and I hope to break through to him. I suggested we move to start fresh, but Jim refuses, saying he will only move if he gets a job promotion. He plans to stay in our current home until the boys finish high school. They don't want to move either because all their friends live nearby. Since the affair, I've lost all my friends in the neighborhood.